Hey everyone, welcome back to Monster Menagerie here at the Paladin Archives. It's me, your benevolent dispenser of cryptid lore, Mason Kren, and today we're continuing our voyage of vampirism. And since it's the month of love, I figured who else should we analyze but everyone's guilty, and occasionally not so guilty, high school crush, the main man of the Twilight Saga, Edward Cullen. Wait, come back! I promise this will be good. I know there are some of you in the audience that may have a certain disposition concerning the Twilight Saga, and while your opinions are valid, I think all fiction should be looked at with an open mind. Besides, I'm not here to say whether the franchise is good or bad, just to analyze Edward. Before we get too deep into this, I do want to take a moment to remind you that if you like Monster Menagerie and all the stuff we do at the Paladin Archives, make sure you check out The Paladin. As we did with Count Dracula, we're going to take a look at the movie Twilight from 2008. Now, my job here at the Stewardship is to observe, monitor, and assess the threat level of creatures we may come across, and make recommendations for paladins in the field. So, we'll be doing that same thing here with Edward Cullen. Once again, we're only taking things we can observe in the specific source material, the movie Twilight. The rest of the saga, the original books, and all the extra materials that expand on the lore are off limits. Remember, this isn't an assessment of the film or the franchise as a whole. It's not a deep dive into the lore of Twilight. It's an assessment of Edward Cullen himself, based on only what we can observe in the first movie. When I assess threats for paladins in the field, I don't always have the luxury of lore or reference materials to fall back on, so often I have to make quick calls based purely on what I can observe. That's what we're doing here. So for everyone in the comments section saying I don't know anything about Twilight, yes, you're right. That's the point. Now remember, at the end of this season, we're going to stack all the vampires against each other and rank them to see which one most exemplifies what makes a vampire a vampire. I'm definitely going to need your input on that when the time comes. Now, without further ado, let's get this started. Oh, wait, if we're doing Twilight, I have to get us in the right mood for this. Let me hold on. There we go. All right, let's roll, Spider Monkey. From what we learn in the movie Twilight, Edward Cullen and his family have been around since the turn of the 20th century. Sometime around 1920, he was turned into a vampire, and he and his family subsequently had some run-ins with a Native American tribe in Washington state. Apparently the tribe are some form of changelings or lycans, but we'll look at that can of worms in a different video. The movie shows us the curse, for a lack of better word, is passed through biting. It looks like they have the typical vampire trait of needing to drink blood, but according to Edward, they're vegetarians. That's actually interesting. You see, in the Order, when we deal with vampires, we typically make contracts with organized covens. We try to provide them with a steady supply of blood in exchange for them, not snacking on people. I've heard, though, that there are vampires that will feed on livestock or whatnot in lieu of human blood, though I'm not sure if that's as effective. And actually, I've even heard of vampires subsisting on coconut water, if you can believe it. What else have we got on him? Oh, well, apparently the family moves around every few years, and since Edward remains eternally 17, he keeps going to high school. A lot? Jeez, that sounds like hell. But it tells us a bit about his family's desire to integrate and live amongst normal humans. Always a good sign for paladins. We get a few contradicting glimpses into Edward's personality, but based on his interactions with Bella, we can see he and his family more or less tolerate, if not enjoy, the company of humans. He plays baseball, drives a car, goes to science class. About the only thing I can really say is that all that high school is probably taking a toll on his mental health. Surrounded by all that teenage angst for decades upon decades, it's no surprise his dominant personality trait seems to be edge. Actually, now that I think about it, as a way to continue to adapt to modern culture, it's not bad. An issue many vampires face is getting stuck in their old culture. It's easy to keep up with trends and slang when you're a teen, but when you get older, you have less and less time. And especially since the advent of the internet, culture and language change so quickly, it's easy for vampires to think, I'm using terms from 1995. That's only 5 years ago, right? No, that's 25 years ago. Edward continuously exposing himself to youth culture is like language immersion. You know, like when you move to another country to learn the language. It helps him stay current with trends, new vocabulary, and thus keeps the suspicion off him. Now, I'm not really sure if it affects his threat level assessment, but there's a bit of concern for his lack of personal boundaries and proclivity for breaking and entering. It might be worth mentioning to any paladins that make contact his, habit of watching a nearly naked underage girl sleep. How does this shake out for paladin interaction, though? Probably more positive than negative. So far, the threat level seems to be fairly low, but let's check out his abilities. Okay guys, bear with me here. This is going to be a long section. These vampires have a lot of powers to go over, and very little actually demonstrating them in a measurable way. I know I'm just begging for a horde of Twilight fans to storm my comment section telling me about other books or movies that explain how wrong I am. Please understand, I'm doing my best to be fair to Edward based on what we can actually observe. There's just so much to analyze and so little to illustrate it, but I'll do my best. Within the film, it's not always clear what applies to all vampires and what only applies to Edward, but I'll try to peel it apart carefully, starting with Edward's unique power. In the movie, vampires share a common set of abilities, plus one, let's call it a super power. For Edward Cullen, this appears to be telepathy.
So what, you read minds?
I can read every mind in this room.
Definitely something to consider when assessing his threat level later. He is apparently barraged by it at all times, but is capable of screening out the noise when he doesn't want to focus on it. It also seems like he has quite the range as well. Not only is he able to hear the thoughts of the thugs in Port Angeles while tailing Bella, it appears that he's able to read his sister's mind from a couple of states away. Assuming Alice is indeed trying to share information with Edward, he's reading her thoughts while she's in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's in the vicinity of Forks, Washington, an approximate distance of 1,500 miles or 2,414 kilometers. I'm going to assume that's a selective ability that has to do with either him focusing, Alice focusing, or both, because hearing all the thoughts of every person within a 1,500-mile radius would drive him insane. In any case, it's still an incredible range. I think even Professor X needs Cerebro to get distance like that. Bella, for some reason, seems to be immune to this, which tells me there is a set of circumstances under which this power can be subverted, possibly all the other superpowers of his family as well. Next, we have his superhuman strength and speed. Not particularly unique amongst vampires in fiction, but certainly something to pay attention to. I had a heck of a time finding anything that actually demonstrated his strength or speed in a meaningful, measurable way, though. Now, before you race to the comments to tell me the obvious, yes, Edward does some impressive things. The problem is, we need to be able to measure what he's doing, running or lifting, to get an idea of his capabilities with any meaning. To that end, there are 3 scenes we're going to be visiting and revisiting to figure out Edward's strength and speed: the baseball game, the forest, and the van. Let's start with his strength. Now, because of the baseball scene in this movie, I figured calculating Edward's strength would be a home run. Well, it turns out it's more like a foul tip. Edward takes Bella out to the middle of nowhere to watch his family play baseball during a thunderstorm. I'm not going to waste time here critiquing the choices made by the Cullens during this scene, like placing Bella squarely in the path of an oncoming ball thrown by a superhuman vampire with no protection, or that she's within feet of a collision that creates a sound loud enough to be confused with thunder but has no ear protection. No, we're going to stay on topic. Ignoring the literally thunderous noise they're making, the presumably aluminum bats the Cullens use aren't damaged in this game. The ball isn't damaged. Now, it's not unheard of for aluminum bats to snap, even in softball, so I can only imagine these vampires should be going through these things in bulk, but neither bat nor ball seems all the worse for wear. It's hard to get a sense of distance in this scene, but that tree line doesn't seem all that much farther than a standard Major League outfield. And when we see the Cullens at bat, the ball doesn't seem to go any faster than a major league hit. Actually, slower in some shots. Perhaps they're holding back? That would make some sense with Bella being there. In any case, we never see Edward at bat, so the scene does nothing to tell us about his personal strength. We hear in the movie that he's not the strongest one of his family, so even if we put him around Rosalie or his dad's strength, this scene doesn't really help much. How about the scene in the forest where he reveals his true nature to Bella? There, we see him rip a tree out and yeet that sucker. The problem here is we're once again lacking anything measurable that's actually impressive. We see him grab the tree by the roots, or by its trunk, I suppose it depends on which camera is aimed at him, and rip it free. This appears to be a sapling, or at least an immature tree, with its trunk only measuring about 4 inches or so in diameter. I'm not saying uprooting a tree isn't an impressive feat of strength, but this one isn't rooted into the ground, it's hanging off the side of a rocky area with most of its roots visible. Lifting it once free and even tossing it aside really aren't impressive feats for a superhuman, so all we can really go on is prying it loose from its rocky home, a feat that could probably be replicated by a sufficiently trained human. What about the van? I'm actually going to hold off on that for just a moment because that's more interesting than you think. Besides, that van scene is going to get a lot of mileage out of testing Edward's abilities. For now, let's put a pin in that and take a look at his speed. His running feats at the baseball game are okay, but not easily measurable. There's nothing here that lets me get a sense of distance over time. However, if we jump back to the forest scene, he scales a hill that gives us something to work with. In this scene, Edward tosses Bella on his back and hoofs it up this mountain so he can show her how sparkly he is at the top. If we assume Edward is 6'1", the height of Robert Pattinson, we can ballpark the distance he's moving. From the first tree in this shot to the second comes out to about 18 feet or 5.4864 meters. He covers that distance in about 0.75 seconds, so our velocity comes out to 6.858 meters per second, or roughly 15 miles per hour. Not especially impressive for a superhuman, but he is running uphill with a person on his back, so it's not like it's anything I could do. Where his speed really shines, however, is the infamous van scene. Here we see that Edward is across the parking lot from Bella, standing next to his car, his fellow Cullens, and their bright red car that we can use for reference. As the scene pulls back, we get a sense of distance. Now, the average US parking space is between 8 to 9 feet wide and 16 to 18 feet long, so let's be generous and assume these are big spaces. We're going to have to make some assumptions here, but I think we can get within a reasonable degree of certainty. Now, we know Edward didn't run straight through the cars to get to Bella because we can see him come in from the left side of the screen here. That means he most likely went at right angles along the paths between the parking spaces. If we count up the parking spaces side by side, we have 8 visible spaces Edward would have to move along, then about 3 spaces lengthwise. That comes out to a minimum distance of about 126 feet or about 38.4 meters. From the last time we see him by his car, it's approximately 3 seconds until we see him slip into frame with Bella. Now, let's plug in our numbers. Velocity equals distance over time. We have our distance, 38.4 meters, our time, 3 seconds, which gives us a minimum speed of 12.8 meters per second, or 42 feet per second. For the Americans, that's about 28.6 miles per hour, or 46 kilometers per hour for the rest of the world. That's, certainly faster than I can run. To put it in perspective, according to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, Usain Bolt reached a top speed in his 100-meter world record run of 44.72 kilometers per hour, with an average speed of 37.58 kilometers per hour, about 27 and 23 miles per hour respectively for our American audience. So we know he can at least run on par with Olympic athletes, but it seems much slower than I expected. If you think I did the math wrong, please feel free to let me know in the comment section. Let's take a break from all that running and lifting and focus on Edward's super senses, something even harder to pin down. I'm aware from cultural osmosis that he has them, but within the single movie, Twilight, we don't see a ton of examples. Vision, taste, touch, hearing, all of them seem to be present. There's hints of their existence, but nothing concrete for me to really work off of. If you guys know of something specific from the first movie, feel free to drop the scene in the comment section, but as it stands, I can only really talk about Edward's sense of smell. My first thought was that vampires would be something like bloodhounds, but I think that's a poor comparison. Edward first takes visible notice of Bella's scent in the science classroom while she's standing in front of a fan. At that distance, anyone without a cold should be able to notice her perfume or shampoo. Furthermore, Edward actually gets much closer to her in the scene just before this, back in the cafeteria. He seems to take no notice of her scent there. Perhaps he hasn't associated it with someone interesting yet? In both scenes, there are certainly plenty of other scents that could interfere with his sense of smell, but it really seems like it's not a matter of distance, but range. I get the impression from this that Edward's sense of smell isn't about how close or far his subject is from him, but that he's instead smelling things a normal human can't. He's smelling in infrared, if you will. It would make sense that if his kind have evolved to hunt humans, that they would become particularly sensitive to the unique scents humans give off, something we can't really pick up ourselves. Add to this the fact that Bella's scent really only seems to be noticeable by him and even James the tracking vampire when the wind is favorable, and it really seems like it's not a matter of distance, it's just a matter of range. Moving on, if Edward is to be taken at his word, his very visage is crafted to entice humans.
Everything about me invites you in. My voice, my face, even my smell.
Something to consider when sending out a group to deal with him. There are a lot of students, though mostly male, that seem to have a distaste for him despite this, so it might not be a universally applicable trait. Let's not forget that shimmering skin. When exposed to direct sunlight, he sparkles. Bella specifically says it's like diamonds.
It's like diamonds.
And I think that may be connected to his apparent invulnerability. For the record, we don't see his invulnerability on display in this movie, but he does say that dismemberment and burning is the only way to kill a vampire. It's possible that the vampirism in his world causes the skin to toughen, compress, perhaps calcify into a hard diamond-like state. His skin seems to still squish and move like normal humans when Bella, tests the elasticity of his epidermis. But that doesn't discount the idea. More study would be needed, but it's definitely something I'd put in my Paladin report. Lastly, there seems to be a weird, undescribed power Edward has that we see demonstrated, but not really acknowledged. He seems to have a Spider-Man-esque wall-crawling ability, or perhaps the ability to control his own gravity, a la the Blob from X-Men comics. If you watch when he's climbing trees, the motion he's making is more akin to a doggy paddle than actually climbing. There's no gripping into the tree, no squeezing from the side, just this dog paddle-like maneuver. Furthermore, when he leaps from tree to tree, there's no arc from gravity pulling down on him. He sails across in straight lines despite his speed being relatively slow. This is supported even more when we go back to the scene where he saves Bella from being crushed. Remember that pin we put in the van scene? You thought I forgot, didn't you? We're told that it's his strength that stops the van, but being that Edward's mass is, presumably, the same as any human, a careening van should have knocked him into Bella's truck. The fact that he doesn't move can't be attributed to strength. He didn't punch the van, he held out his arm to stop it. This means he must be anchored to the asphalt in some way, like a concrete barrier. Either the aforementioned wall-crawling ability or him altering gravity could account for him not being knocked back. Now, while I'm sure Bella has a much more intimate familiarity with Edward's physiology than the movie allows us, I'm gonna take a stab at it. Stab? Like, with a steak? I'm hilarious. Anyway, we see that Edward and his family are all incredibly pale, even by the standard of white people living in the Pacific Northwest. It's unclear if it's a lack of blood or exposure to the sun, but since he's also apparently cold to the touch, I'd wager on the former. Surprisingly for a vampire, we see no appearance of fangs in this movie, even when he's fighting James in the ballet studio and they get all rah, 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 grr, rah, rah, rah. Just nothing but perfect pearly whites. Makes me wonder if Dad Cullen is a doctor or a dentist. Beyond that, we don't see anything else that really stands out. No hinged jaws, no proboscis, no black eyes. Again, it's mentioned at least twice that the only way to kill them, or at least the most effective at the moment, is dismemberment followed by immolation.
I've had to fight our kind before, but not easy to kill.
But not impossible. We'll tear them apart and burn the pieces.
Good thing to know for later. Okay, so now we're going to bring together all that information to consider the Paladin threat level. If you don't remember from last time, when we send out Paladins to take care of situations, we try to give them a threat level for quick reference. It lets them understand at a glance how dangerous a situation might be. I tend to err on the side of caution and overrate threats, but that can lead to its own set of problems. The scale ranges from 1 to 10, with 1 being something like, pixies. They're annoying, but short of getting their hands on something dangerous, they themselves are likely not a big threat. 10, on the other hand, is a world-ending threat, so think like Cthulhu just appeared off the coast of New York and has begun singing the song that will end reality. Edward certainly has the capacity to do some real damage, but based on what we see in the movie, it seems like he's much less likely to attack than to try to reason with a paladin. He has a clear affection for humans, and that whole veggie vampire thing doesn't hurt. Assuming he's in his right frame of mind and he's just, peeping on underage girls or something, I don't think his threat level is particularly high. I'm going to go ahead and give him a threat level of 2. Now, let's assume a paladin in the field accidentally ran over Bella Swan. That whole incident in Port Angeles tells me that when she's involved, he can at least consider full-on murder. Now we have to actually contend with all those powers. Assuming it's just him and not his whole family, I'd bump that up to threat level 3. Now, you're probably yelling at me that Edward can literally rip a paladin agent to pieces, and maybe he can? But I'm just going off what I can observe in the movie, and I don't see him doing anything more dangerous than the typical vampires we deal with at the stewardship. Maybe he has enough strength to throw a car, but the movie doesn't show me that. Maybe he's fast enough to outrun a different car he didn't throw, but again, the movie doesn't show me that. Based on his fight with James and everything else we see in this movie, Edward Cullen gets an upper limit of Paladin threat level 3. You'll need a plan, you'll need some gear, and you'll probably need backup. Okay, let's look at possible ways to contain him. Firstly, negotiations are not only on the table, but preferable, unless we're in the aforementioned Bella as a pancake scenario. This could very easily be solved non-violently. But if something happens to Bella, we're going to have to deal with all those powers. If he really does have super senses, assaulting them might be a good way to throw him off. Flashbang grenades, LRADs, or long-range acoustic devices, a malodorant, that's a fancy word for a stink bomb. It could all give a paladin the edge in detaining him. A common tactic we have for stronger, larger targets is the use of charge rounds. They're like self-contained tasers that are fired from a rifle. I'm not certain if normal ammunition or blades would pierce Edward's skin, but if we hit him with a high enough charge, it won't matter how strong he is. If his muscles lock up, he can't hurt anyone. The real issue might be containing him. Assuming his strength is only what we see on display, high-grade restraint should be enough. If he's stronger, we might need a specialized cage for transport. He doesn't sleep, so I wonder if traditional sedatives would even work to knock him out. It'd be worth a shot. If I was pressed, I suppose the fact that he needs blood regularly might be exploitable. We might be able to either starve him into submission or, if we can pierce that diamond skin, drain him enough to weaken him. Lastly, assuming capture isn't the goal, well, they make reference to immolation being the only way to kill a vampire. Incendiary rounds, or if you're desperate, perhaps something as simple as a Molotov cocktail could be used to bring Edward down in a more, permanent fashion. Again, this is all based on just one source, the Twilight movie. It's my job here at the Stewardship to assess and make recommendations for paladins before they go out. What they choose to do after is up to them. With that all in mind, my recommendation is, first and foremost, negotiation. It seems likely Edward would be open to talking. That means a peaceful solution is probably possible. I think the big issue here, though, is going to be who gets sent out to deal with him. Usually the Stewardship would determine which paladins get sent out based on location and area of discipline, but Edward is unique. That telepathy means we need to make sure whoever we send out is genuine in their efforts to work with him. Since I don't know all the paladins in the Stewardship personally, my recommendation is to put this out to all the available parish fathers and trust their judgment of their subordinates. If we get a loose cannon out there that tries to schmooze him with pretty words but is thinking about putting a bullet in his head, Things are going to escalate quickly. Now, assuming Bella is smushed and Edward is on a kill spree, we have to change up tactics. Armored vestments, holy water, why not try, sensory assault devices, and stun rifles with charge rounds. Highest charge. Make sure to take a full squad and notify neighboring parishes. The need for backup on this one seems likely. Well, prudent at least. With that telepathy, he'd easily be able to track any paladins in the area. I don't have any immediate suggestions for avoiding detection via telepathy. Maybe focus on spiritualists, the paladins that specialize in demons and ghosts, since they're trained to keep their thoughts and emotions in check. They tend to be less efficient in direct combat though, so there's a trade-off. Now, I can't guarantee that movie creatures of any kind obey the laws of our world, but assuming these vampires do, see if the scanners here at the stewardship can get a beat on him, try to track his dark energy. Paladins in the field should use standard tracking methods, either sensing by themselves or using their devices, and try to cut off his escape. Now, perhaps it's just because that James guy was a vampire, but it didn't seem like Edward's telepathy proved particularly useful in combat. So, standard anti-freak engagement left up to the responding paladin's discretion. Constant sensory assault and liberal use of charge rifles if we're bringing him in, fire-based attacks if not. If we can pierce his skin, attempt to drain enough blood to weaken him. Recommend Blessed Manacles to bring him in. Not sure if they'd have any effect, but it's worth trying. Prepare a reinforced cage with constant sensory attacks to keep him disoriented. Well, that's my analysis of Edward Cullen. If anything, I certainly came to the conclusion that he's much less Incredible Hulk and much more Captain America. He's like the peak of human conditioning. Obviously, there's a lot more we learn in the other movies and books and whatnot, but based solely on Twilight, how do you think I did? Edward was a more interesting case than I assumed when I started this movie. There's a lot to consider. He's kind of unique among fictional vampires. He's definitely more dangerous than Count Dracula, I'll say that much. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Monster Menagerie. Remember, at the end of the year, we're bringing all our vampire subjects together and ranking those bad boys. We're going to put out a poll for everyone to join in on and tell us where you think they rank, so make sure you keep an eye out for it. So, who's your favorite so far? Dracula? Edward? I have a feeling there might be a leaning in one direction, but I'll keep my opinions to myself. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you enjoyed this, and why don't you drop down to the comment section and tell us who you want to see next. Follow us on Twitter at Paladin Archive, no S at the end, and drop some monster requests there too. Well, I have to head back into the archives before Maddie realizes I'm not back from lunch. Until next time, keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's hiding out there. All right, hold on, Spider Monkey.